This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Ian Dale.
Very good evening. It's 9:03 on LBC. We are streaming this hour, so if you'd like to watch us as well, you can do so on Global Player, on the LBC YouTube channel, Facebook page and Twitter feed. We're going to talk about what many people would regard as quite a difficult emotional subject in this hour, and it is suicide. And we will give out various numbers that people can avail themselves of if you feel the need to over the course of the next hour. And the reason that we're going to do this is because Owen Paterson is a Conservative MP, somebody I've known for goodness knows how many years. He's sitting opposite me now, by the way. Welcome, Owen. And we're talking to him about this tonight because just over a year ago, his wife Rose took her own life. And I mean, when that happens to any family, it's devastating. Everyone's life is thrown upside down. So we're going to talk about what happened, maybe why it happened, what the family have gone through over the last year, but also the fact that he's formed a new charity in his wife Rose's name, the Rose Paterson Trust. So we're going to talk a little bit about suicide awareness training. We're going to talk about what signs to look for, because Owen, I mean, you've been very open talking about this, and every time you talk about it, it must be a painful thing to do. But none of you saw it coming. And that's what I think people who haven't been through anything like this, who don't know anything about this, that they will always think, well, there must have been a sign.
No, we had no sign whatever. And that's why I'm doing these broadcasts, because if it could happen to us, and it could happen to someone like Rose with all her talents, all her success, and her life was, in many ways, really taking off. You know, she'd taken on Ancient Racecourse, already very successful, but she'd taken it a whole step further as the chairman. She'd just been made a steward of the Jockey Club, where she was going to do really interesting things on welfare, because she was very good a horsewoman herself. So she could help the Jockey Club and put in real knowledge. I mean, before she went to Cambridge, where we met, she'd actually worked for Gavin Pritchard-Gordon in Newmarket as a stable lass.
And she had a real affinity with horses, didn't she?
Yeah, she had a real feel for horses. She rode beautifully. We did the Mongol Derby together. And she was pretty tough and brave. So she really did understand. So she could help on that. And all that she was doing. She had a great record with charity. She'd run Weston Park as the chairman. So we got three marvellous children who had grown up sort of late 20s or early 30s. One was married then with our first grandchild. The next son was engaged, and he's since got married. And my daughter's late 20s. And we all lived very happily through lockdown. Although that was quite intense for everyone, all confined together. But in many ways, for people listening to this, she had many, many advantages. I mean, she was incredibly intelligent, she was incredibly good looking, she had tremendous taste in not just horses, but pictures.
I thought you were going to say men then.
No. I think men perhaps made an early mistake. So we met at Cambridge 45 years ago. She was incredibly well read. She had an awful lot going, and yet there was this hidden problem which we just didn't know about.
She'd never talked about any form of depression over those 45 years at all.
No, I think like many women at her age, I mean, she would be just about to be 65 in 3 weeks' time. She'd been through the menopause and had very mild medication for anxiety and insomnia, things like that. And about 5 or 10, no, I don't know what, 7 or 8 years before that, she'd also had mild depression, but she was on nothing at the time. We knew she was anxious, and I always stress this. I think I certainly probably had a caricature image of someone who was depressed, who was very obviously miserable, possibly living on their own, possibly escaping with alcohol, not eating properly, not looking after themselves. But we knew she was anxious. She was anxious about issues in my political life, she was becoming much more sensitive to press criticism than when I first went into politics. She hated the attacks on herself. And there's some idiotic articles shortly before she died associated with her and the Jockey Club. So we knew she was anxious about things. I think the lockdowns are strained. She'd had COVID. We both had COVID. I was completely wiped out by it for about 3 weeks in March last year. I said, well, I wasn't really sure whether she'd gone to bed or not, but she didn't really believe in being ill. So she probably didn't really rest up. So all these things probably all came together. But you asked the straight question, did we have a sign? Did we have a discussion about this? Not once.
Tell us about the day that it happened.
Well, the day it happened, Parliament had just sort of come back in a pretty hopeless, unsatisfactory manner. And I'd come down, I think for only the second week on the Monday, and sat in my office for 2 days making pointless video calls to other MPs, sitting in their office making other pointless video calls. So for me, I'm pretty unhappy about that. You know, I could perfectly easily be at home. And when I was in London, we always tried to speak to each other in the morning and always spoke in the evening. And frequently the calls were pretty unsatisfactory. We were all both quite busy. It always had a bit of a coincidence if we both rang when the other was not busy and she was often not around. So I rang that morning on a Tuesday 2 or 3 times. Funnily enough, I opened her phone up. I've kept her phone going, so I need to keep all her numbers. And I just happened to notice this week. I think I rang 3 times. I sent a text about 11 o'clock. Just said, you know, really, really trite, mundane stuff. Just tried to get, but I'm free till 1, give us a buzz. Didn't ring back. I thought she could have gone to Aintree. She could have gone off somewhere. Frequently she was down the wood. She was gardening on her own and had her earphones on and missed it. They're not really out of the ordinary. Then in the evening I did think it was strange. Tried to ring about 6, didn't answer. That was unusual because she was very, very organised and always came in and cleared her emails. She was very, very disciplined about that. And then my second son, he was the only one there with his then fiancée, rang, I think probably towards 7, quite alarmed. And he also hadn't seen her all day. Now that wasn't entirely unusual because he was working incredibly hard, as was his fiancée, and they were upstairs. But he was quite worried. So I said, well, you better start looking. You know, and all through the evening, we thought something had happened to her. And we have this wood. It's about 10, 15 acres of woodland, which we've been sort of restoring and replanting for years, which was a sort of massive occupation for both of us, actually, but particularly her. And she was frequently down there with a strimmer, and we thought of things that might have gone wrong. So Ned organised a search with some close neighbours. But by 8 o'clock, that was looking bad. And at 8:15, I rang the Met from my office and put out a formal notice. They got hold of West Mercia Police, who were incredibly efficient, and put on an amazing operation very rapidly. And then my elder son and I, we met pretty quickly, and we drove up as quick as we could go. And we arrived home. We lived about 200 miles from London. We got back about midnight, and it had been a very, very hot June day. And we were met by the policeman in charge, and he came straight up to me, and he knew exactly what he was looking for. And he said, "Mr. Patterson, does your wife suffer from depression?" And I was actually quite stuffy. I thought, you know, it's a really hot day. She's out there somewhere. She's had an accident. She's getting dehydrated by now. You know, why isn't absolutely everybody looking? And in fairness, they put on a very big operation. And all the way up in the car, we'd been talking to my second son, Ned, suggesting, you know, we thought every possible physical ailment. She might have had a heart attack. She might have had a stroke. She might have had some respiratory collapse. She might have been swimming, fallen in the brook and banged her head. You know, this time of year, the odd branch tends to fall out of an oak tree and it's got a lot of leaves on it. Might have banged her. We just never thought of this.
Even on the journey up, that wasn't something.
I don't think once. I don't think we mentioned it once. It really was just not on the radar. It just wasn't something she would do. Anyway, they put on this huge search, and eventually, in the early hours of the morning.
And they immediately, presumably, told you.
Yeah, they called us in. We called into the kitchen, which was obviously a very, very bad moment. But I had worse to follow because my daughter was in France. I then had to ring her. I rang and rang and rang from about 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock French time, and eventually got her and had to tell her. It's probably one of the worst things I've had to do.
And the immediate aftermath, I mean, just taking it all on board, the implications, the question as to why it would have happened. I mean, and presumably these conversations are still going on now. I mean, they're not just for the immediate.
Yeah, well, to start with, obviously we were completely exhausted and thrown and just shattered by the whole thing. But the immediate circumstances made it all even more extraordinary, because the day she was found was my birthday, and she was going to have a meeting over the telephone, by telephone for entry. She was chairing a meeting. All her notes are still on her desk. She was then going to go down to London and take her aunt out to lunch, who had had a very difficult time, elderly single person during the lockdown. Then she was going to go shopping, and the shopping list is still on her desk, and buy my birthday dinner with my daughter-in-law. And the following day, she was going to go to France to spend a week with my daughter. And there's a lot of debate about buying the Eurostar ticket on the Friday before, because I was deemed incapable of looking after myself alone more than one weekend. So we found this incredibly hard to understand. It was just unfathomable. But obviously in the last year, we've talked a lot to ourselves, a lot of other people. I've talked to a lot of people who really have tremendous knowledge about suicide, have been immensely patient and kind to me. I've talked to some real experts, and people who have tried to kill themselves. And I think our current feeling is that there is this issue of anxiety which is incredibly intense but not shown, and then something triggers it. And one person who did try to kill himself told me it's like a snake bite. You just get this surge, you get the snake bite, the only solution you can see is to clear this. And another very good expression is a mental heart attack. You just have a total seizure.
Because she didn't leave a letter or anything?
We had nothing, no. So, and as I said, we know there were worries about my political life. We know she was absurdly upset by these idiotic press articles. And that's why I'm now a huge advocate of suicide awareness training.
Hold that thought, because we're going to come on to that in just a second. And I'm going to... You've heard Owen's story over the last 10 minutes or so, and there may be many people listening to this who've gone through something. I mean, I don't know whether... I don't think there can be ever two identical incidences, but there will be people who are thinking, yeah, that might have happened to me. Who knows? If you'd like to talk to Owen, the number is 0345 6060 973, and we'll come to your calls probably after 5:30, because I want to talk in more detail about suicide awareness training and indeed the work of the Rose Patterson Trust.
Ian Dale on LBC.
With Purple Bricks. Book your free in-home or virtual valuation.
9:20 is the time on LBC. We're talking to the Conservative MP Owen Patterson, and we're talking about suicide We're talking about the fact that his wife took her own life just over a year ago. And you just mentioned, Owen, suicide awareness training, which I think most people won't. I mean, OK, we can work out what it means, but most people wouldn't even be aware that it's there.
Well, no, it's one of the things I've learned about in the last year. And the great advocate of this is Joe Rafferty, who runs the Zero Suicide Alliance, who runs the really big health trust in Merseyside. And they did a poll of their staff. They employ thousands of people and found that 80% thought that once someone had decided to end their life, suicide was inevitable. And the training doesn't take very long. It's very simple. After their staff had been through that, went down to 10% thinking a suicide was inevitable. And he's done really great work at Liverpool Prison, where employing techniques making people aware of suicide, they have very, very strikingly reduced suicides. And then I talked a very interesting project in guys in Dublin, I suppose about a month ago now, and they had a small part of southwest Dublin. They had the worst record of suicide in the Republic of Ireland, and they all really pulled a finger out, got their act together, put everyone of significance through a suicide awareness training course, and now they have the lowest rate of suicide in the Republic of Ireland. So I would like everybody listening to this programme to do it. I would like every member of Parliament to do it, every member of Parliament staff, every doctor, every nurse, every head of an NHS institution, every head teacher, every teacher, looking you very firmly in the eye, every editor and every journalist on every national and local paper.
And radio station.
So when there's some glib comment giving what they think is a Tory MP a nice easy kicking, just think of the impact.
Yeah.
Every charity should be doing this. If we had a really concerted effort, we might have an impact, because this is a shocking problem. And one of the things that astounds me, having been an MP for 24 years, I just didn't know how big a problem this was until it hit me. In the next 4 minutes, someone will try to kill themselves. In the next 90 minutes, a UK citizen will kill themselves. That's about 6,500 people a year. That's 15 jumbo jets a year. And I always say this, what would happen to Rolls-Royce, General Electric, Airbus, Boeing, if you were killing that many people? You would not have people flying in aeroplanes. There would be a huge government concerted effort on it.
So why hasn't there been? I mean, why is it that?
Well, I think
after
partly
24 years, you yourself just said, I wasn't aware of this.
Well, as you said, you were quite different at the beginning. People don't like talking about this, and that's why I'm doing it, because I can't be more miserable than I am now. And if I can somehow wake people up to the extraordinary level of anguish that this leaves for those of us left behind, I might have done a little bit of good. And people don't talk about it. There's this ridiculous taboo. It's the biggest cause of death for people under 35. It is absolutely shocking. And the impact on those left behind is enormous. Now, there's a very good academic study which says 135 people are seriously affected. Well, personally, I think in Rosie's case, that's quite...
You mean for every person that takes
for every
life,
person.
there's 135.
Yeah. Okay, so that's, very quickly doing sums in your head, what's that, 900,000? It's the thick end of 1 million people a year.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people. But I think it's more than that. I think that's quite a conservative underestimate. Now, that's a huge impact. And I've seen it with my eyes. I mean, just by chance, I was in a meeting the other day, and a guy I know very well who's extremely competent, extremely experienced. He's had a senior job in the army, got a serious job in industry, came in damaged by it, and will be. And the other thing that's really worth stressing is people say time heals. Well, we've gone a year now, and I'd say things, if anything, got worse. So there's an absolute devastating impact on those left behind. So to start with, doing this, I was stressing the damage to people left behind, but the utter tragedy, of course, the most obvious one, and it may sound puterishly trite to say it, it's for the person themselves. And the absolute key message is no suicide is necessary and no suicide is inevitable. This just does not need to happen. And we have to have an absolute monster concerted effort. And that's not just looking to the government. And the government is shelling out more money. I was on a call, the PPG today with Nadine Dorries was on. You know, there is more money going to mental health. But that is not going to reach every single family. And that's where I get the suicide awareness training, if we were all more aware of it.
And why can you get it? And how long does it take? And
takes about half an hour.
What's involved?
What it involves is a very brief session taking about half an hour explaining the characteristics of a suicide and what to look out for. So in Rosie's case, I think now, as I said, I think he has moved on in a year. I originally began thinking if only she had known of the damage she was going to do to us, and of course there's a terrible sense of poor little us left behind, she wouldn't have done it. But the real lesson is the terrible damage she's done to her. You know, she's thrown away 25 years. And her life was really, really taking off. Her career was really, really hitting the big time. And it is just utterly tragic. Every suicide, no suicide is necessary and no suicide is inevitable. And that's where these websites are so extraordinarily dangerous, because they are so seductive in their narrative. And we didn't know about these. And again, amazing as an MP, I did not know these websites existed until, I suppose, it was between her death and the funeral. So almost exactly this time last year, because we're 2 days now from the anniversary of the funeral. So probably exactly this week, the police came back with her laptop, and they'd done a word search on suicide and thrown up the fact that on the 10th of June, she had been looking at suicide websites at about 8 or 9 minutes to 7. And the narrative is extraordinarily seductive and dangerous. And it's that every life goes through a happy, constructive phase, and then it plateaus. And then sadly, a life begins to go downhill and is essentially negative. And finally, it's fairly obvious there's nothing more to achieve with that life. So it's absolutely natural and sensible and quite proper. It's not mad, it's not dangerous, it's not angry, it's not miserable, it's not sad. It's quite a sensible thing to do, to consider ending it. And then, in fairness, you know, these wonderful organisations like Samaritans of Mind have got themselves in there on some of these websites. There is a page saying, you know, steady, ring these numbers if you are feeling bad. But I'm afraid the websites then go on after a pause. They say take a pause and they go on. And then there's some very, very dangerous material.
Who runs these websites?
Well, that's a very good question.
And what's their motive in doing so?
Goodness knows. Some people think it's a good thing. And of course they are very dangerous, because my very clear message is that, you know, 10 years ago, if Rose had gone to Oswestry, gone to Smith's, said, I like a book on suicide, there would not have been a book on suicide. And someone would have grabbed her by the hand, taken her off for a cup of coffee, and I would have been called. Things would have been very different. And now you have the internet, which is obviously the most wonderful boon to mankind, putting out good information, but can be very, very dangerous putting out bad information. So the government is taking this on, which I think is tremendous. It's an incredibly difficult task in the online safety bill. And I've talked to, I talked to the then Secretary of State, I've talked to Nadine Dorries, talked to Caroline Downey, who's been really good on this, who's trying to draft the bill.
She's a health minister.
No, she's the DCMS minister.
Right.
Under Oliver Dowden. But they have got this bill trying to bring some, I wouldn't say discipline, but sort of sense to the wild west of the internet. Now, some people say glibly, we'll just ban them. Well, that's just nonsense. They'll just go underground. I mean, you're never trying to ban into the internet. My mantra is we have to fight technology with technology. And there's some very brave people. So, a person may not have heard of called Alice Hendy, whose brother killed himself quite recently in November, and she's come up with some really interesting ideas on proactive shots which come up. So you Google up suicide, something comes up immediately, flashes up to divert you from these other websites. And the government's looking at all this, and I've had meetings with them, and I've brought together quite a broad range of people, So we were talking earlier, I mean, Alistair Campbell, I've talked to a lot. I mean, Alistair's been incredibly brave about his own mental illness and terrible family background. 2 close relations killed themselves. Again, way down the end of the political seesaw, Richard Bergen, who is very distant from me on many things political, but he had a very bad constituency case, and I've been in touch with him, and he's come on board. So there is complete unity, really, that we need, quote, to do something. Yeah. My view is that we don't really yet have the technical solutions. What we must do is make sure that this bill is fit for purpose. And when down the road there is something technical where we can match technology with technology, we can slot it in with some sort of secondary legislation. Because none of us has a clue where our iPhone will be in 5 years' time, let alone 10 years' time. But there must be a technical solution to this, because I believe some suicide techniques are being promoted by these websites, which people couldn't possibly learn about unless they were freely available on the internet. And we have to take it on, because it's a very, very real, live evil doing damage now.
Well, we're going to take some calls over the next half an hour. We've got some already, but if you'd like to speak to Owen, maybe you've been through something similar to what he's been through, or maybe you've got views on how these websites can be dealt with. 0345 6060 973. I could actually spend the next half an hour talking to you about the Mongol Derby, which I've heard you talk about before, and it's the most amazing experience I think you probably ever had. And Rose you and Rose did that together. But I'll tell you a podcast where you can listen to Owen talking about that at the end of the show, because it's well worth it.
Ian Dale on LBC.
With Purple Bricks. Meet your local property expert today.
It's 9:36. You can watch this hour on Global Player, on the LBC website, YouTube page, Twitter and Facebook feeds. We're with Owen Paterson, a Conservative MP, and we're talking about suicide and what happened to his wife, Rose. Just give out the website for the new charity.
It's the Rose Paterson Trust.
Yeah,
sorry, I've got
I knew you were going to say that.
I have, actually. I've got my cards on me.
I can
very smart.
I can Google it, but it's .com.
Yeah, so okay. The charity's called the Rose Paterson Trust, and it's www.rosepattersontrust.com with 1 T in Patterson.
Yes.
Everyone in Northern Ireland, beware.
We must remember.
Everyone in Northern Ireland tries to give me 2 T's.
Is that right?
www.rosepattersontrust, all one word, .com.
And you're presumably doing some fundraising for it as well, because, I mean, charities cost a bit of money to run, don't they?
I would like to say publicly, we have been astounded by the reaction. People have been quite amazingly generous, and very, very large numbers of small donations. We've had some spectacular big ones, which we're also incredibly grateful for. But you just be amazed at the number of little ones we've had. And I do hope everybody listening who has given something has got the message from us. But if not, can I please thank you all really sincerely. We've been amazed at the reaction. We launched it on the day of the Grand National, and it's really been spectacular.
Fantastic. Well, it'll enable the Trust to do some fantastic work. Let me read out a couple of texts, and then we'll go to the calls. Becky says, I've just parked up in my car to listen to you talking about how suicide affects families. It takes courage for this man to talk, sending love. Sharon says, I lost my son Robert suddenly in 2019. He would be 27 on Saturday. Well, she says he will be 27 on Saturday. I'm so devastated. I feel you have to find inner strength, as no matter what anyone says, it doesn't help. Colin in Croydon says, how does someone give out a signal of feeling suicidal? I know about organisations and support from the doctors, but how can I communicate how I'm feeling to my close friends? Just saying the words is not feasible. He says, Colin from Croydon, age 60. Now, and I think he does that for a reason, because this is a subject that, well, I think a lot of people find difficult to talk about, but it's that there is no subject which ought to be off limits for talking to close friends or family, is there?
No, I mean, that's what we find still extraordinary, that Rose was ultimately prepared to take this terrible, permanent step. And again, I don't want to sound trite, but it is an absolutely final step. There is no going back. It may sound ludicrous to say that, but that's the most desperate key fact of suicide, that for what often may be temporary temporary reasons of unhappiness or stress, anxiety, depression, whatever you want to call it, there is this decision to make an absolutely final act. And she was prepared to do that rather than mention it to us. And that's why I'm so keen on the awareness training, so that those people who are worried or anxious do talk, because it is so much better to do that, even if it's embarrassing.
And also, Colin, even if you can't bring yourself to talk to a close friend or a close family member, there are brilliant organisations out there that provide helplines like the Samaritans. I mean, they are used to talking to people who are feeling in this way, and they know what to do. And their number is 116123. If you're a younger person, Papyrus, they are brilliant people. We've had them on the programme before, 0800 068 41 41. We'll give those numbers out again a little bit later. But let's go to your calls. Amy's in Lambeth. Hello, Amy.
Hi.
Hi, what would you like
thanks
to
for having me
say?
on.
Hi.
First of all, I just want to say, Owen, I'm so sorry for your loss. I lost my mother about 4 years ago, and she was the same age as your wife, and my sisters and I were in our 20s and our late teens. And, you know, it's exactly what you said. I'm devastated, not only for us, but for her and everything that she's lost out. You know, I'm getting married next year. She won't see my sisters and I get married and have children. It's awful. And since she died through suicide, I've really read everything you possibly can read to try and educate myself. And I've learned so much about the connection, because my mum had postnatal depression, and then she got depression when she hit her menopause. And I had no idea that there was a connection towards that. So I've been trying to work out a way to, you know, raise awareness of that and educate not only my friends, but my parents' friends who are, you know, about to hit their menopausal age and have no idea what's going to come to them. And I think it's something which is just not spoken about. And I really admire you being so open about it, because it's really difficult. And I went on a podcast last year and I said how difficult it is to come to terms with being able to say not only that, you know, I've lost mummy, but through suicide, because it's such a confronting subject. You can see people physically recoil when you have that conversation. And it takes a lot, I think, to be able to say that publicly and be so open about it. So I think what you're doing is just fantastic.
Well, I'm terribly sorry for what happened to you. It's just awful when you have weddings and children who will never see a mother-in-law, never see a grandchild, which is your case and my case. So this is the reason why we've set up the trust. And we have a really very simplistic aim, which is if we could help stop just one family going through the extreme anguish that we are, and will continue to, in my case, well, all of us, for the rest of our lives, we might have done a little bit of good. And there is this absolute nonsense about not talking about it.
Agreed.
It is absolutely absurd when in the next 90 minutes, someone will kill themselves. Yeah. And the next 4 minutes, someone will try. It is absolutely shocking. But people find it hard to talk about.
They do. But you can see people get very uncomfortable when they... I mean, I remember someone saying to me, I'm so sorry to hear your mum died. Was she ill? Did she have cancer? And I thought, of course, I now have to sort of, you know, make you feel uncomfortable, because what I'm about to tell you that's happened to me, but I know that you're going to feel more uncomfortable hearing it than I am saying it. And that just has to change.
I agree. Which is very much why we've gone public, and I'm doing these broadcasts to be really brutal with people, to wake them up that you can't just glibly say, I'm so sorry your wife passed away. She didn't pass away. She killed herself. And we got to face up to this, and then we have to ask why. You know, why could she not bring herself to talk to us? And then the other infuriating thing people say to me is, "Oh, you mustn't beat yourself up." Well, of course I beat myself up every minute, because why?
Never going to go away.
How on earth did I not notice? You're married to someone for 40 years. It cuts both ways. It is utterly tragic that she couldn't bring herself to say how bad it was for her. But it's also pretty astonishing that I didn't know, and I was unaware. And perhaps if I had done some suicide awareness training and I'd seen some of the signs, perhaps we might have talked about it and I might have asked her.
Amy, thank you so much for your call. Jane says, please could you give out details of where to find these suicide awareness training courses that Owen mentioned? I'd like to do it. Thank you to Owen.
Google up Zero Suicide Alliance.
And are these online courses, or do you actually go to somewhere
Some's
to
online,
physically
but
do it?
or they do it over the phone.
Right. Okay, well, just Google it, Jane. Simple as that. Let's go to Margaret in Horsham. Hello, Margaret.
Hello, Ian. Hi. I'm just loving this show. I love listening to you anyway on LBC. It's the first time I've called in. Owen Patterson, all I want to say to you is how brave you are, and I'm really sorry for your loss. I know it must have been absolutely tragic for you and your family, but it's great what you're doing now to help others. Mental health is so close to my heart. Reason being is that obviously I've been there myself. I've experienced it at its worst. I've had a lot of losses in my life. My brother died last year suddenly, fit and healthy, and he collapsed and died. So it's something that I think is mental health. It's very commonly spoken about now. It's on most people's tongues. It's a day-to-day conversation. However, there's a difference between suffering depression and mental health and feeling suicidal. And the reason why I say that is that I found it easier talking to close friends that I'm feeling low, I'm feeling depressed, low mood, etc. But to be able to say to somebody I'm feeling suicidal, I think takes on a completely different aspect. It's still, I feel, a taboo subject. Hello?
Yeah, no, carry on, Margaret. We're listening.
Oh, sorry. I was just I'm in the other room. I can hear the radio in the other room. So I still feel it's a bit of a taboo subject. And when you are the person who's feeling suicidal, it's quite a selfish and isolating thought. It's not a thought that you will immediately think I need to talk to somebody about it. I mean, luckily, if you do, then that's great because you can get help immediately. But I still think it's quite an isolating thought. And also, even though there is help out there for people who are suffering with depression and anxiety, there's not enough help. And also, the help isn't immediate. There's always waiting lists because the demand is so high.
Well, that's an interesting point, Margaret. I mean, what help is there? Particularly, someone I know tried to get some help from mental health help from the NHS, and they were told that they would have to wait months, if not years, to get any form of help. And particularly if you're feeling suicidal, that's not the message that you want to hear.
No. Well, I do admire you for what you just said, that you have talked to people, and that's the most important thing is to talk to someone. So we do know the government is putting in a lot more money into mental health, but it isn't just going to be the state that delivers this. I mean, talk to a friend or a teacher or someone you can trust, someone at work. Always talk rather than bottling it up. And you're quite right what you say, that mentioning suicide is a very brave thing to do. But if you're just feeling anxious, which is the only symptom we saw, please talk to people and please recognise if you're feeling anxious, you ought to be talking to someone. That is infinitely better than taking this terrible permanent step because you're too embarrassed to talk about it, which is where this awful taboo leads to.
Margaret, thank you very much for your call. I'll give out the website if you would like to go on one of these suicide awareness training courses, zerosuicidealliance.com/training. That's zerosuicidealliance.com/training. And the Samaritans helpline again, 116123, and Papyrus Prevention of Young Suicides, 0800 068 41 41.
Ian Dale on LBC.
With Purple Bricks. Manage viewings anywhere with the app.
It's 9:51 on LBC. Let's go to Dave in Hackney. Hello, Dave.
Oh, hello. How are you?
Hi, not bad, thank you. What would you like to say?
Just a small thing that might be slightly worth sharing. I'm in my late 50s now. About 40 years ago, age 17, I nearly killed myself. And there were two big thoughts that stopped me. The first one, I realised it would be too cruel to my family and friends to do that, because that would destroy a number of them forever. And the second thought I had was, at the age of 17, I would therefore miss all the rest of my life, some of which would probably be horrible, but some of it would probably be okay. But either way, I'd miss all of it. And I kind of managed to talk myself out of it. I've shared that a few times down the years with people. Possibly it might be slightly useful to consider. So thanks for having me on, and that's it in a nutshell.
Well, that's very brief and concise, Dave. I think that is quite interesting. Have you... so you didn't talk to anyone at the time. It was literally you were convincing yourself not to do it.
Yeah, I was about 17. My life had gone quite badly. I've had enough of this. This is rubbish. I don't have to put up with it. But then I managed to talk myself out of it in the space of 10, 20 minutes, and just thought, I'm not doing that to my family and friends. And also, let's just find out what the rest of my life is like. Because at the age of 17. To miss all of it, including
I suppose you were looking at it from a clinical logical point of view, but of course that's not the case for a lot of people who just get to that point where they don't see any logic at all. Well, they see they must have a certain logic in their own mind, but it's not what we would think of as logic.
Did you think of calling out some of these wonderful organisations that Ian's mentioned, Samaritans, Mine, Papyrus?
This is 40 years ago. I guess the Samaritans did exist then, but there wouldn't have been the resources available, would there, Dave?
No, but I was thinking at the time, did you think of ringing out, or did you sort it out in your own head?
I had a lot of support from my mum and dad, who were extremely kind and caring people. I had some good friends. Some of my life wasn't that bad. Really, I was overreacting in that manner. I did feel extremely like, this is it, I'm not doing this anymore, it's time to go, which really was a bit stupid. No, I was in severe emotional pain, for real.
Okay.
I was very upset. I had made a severe mess of my life at the tender age of 17. I was in a mess.
Okay. Dave, thank you very much indeed. Andy has tweeted, listening to Ian talking to Owen about his wife's suicide, that takes an amount of strength to speak about publicly. My question for Owen is, what needs to be in place to support individuals who are at risk? And then it ends rather abruptly after someone. I think what he might be getting at is what support you and your family got after this, or did you want to cope by yourselves, or did you all individually or collectively talk to people to help you through it, if there is a way that someone can help you through it?
I think in our case we got some very close friends who have been absolutely marvellous, and that's certainly true in my case, and my children's case. They've had very good friends, and there's been a bit of clinical intervention too. Children have all had some help. Our doctors have been very good. I've done some talking. My children say I should do more.
Which is interesting, because I think you'd probably admit yourself of a generation that probably would have thought sort of, I don't need to talk to people about this. It's down to me to cope. But have you found talking about it to people of help?
Oh, certainly, talking to people does help. No, you have to talk. You can't bottle it up. And it hits you at funny times. Music is disastrous. Music reminds you of the past. In our case, as I said, Rose is a very good gardener. So lots of the trees and the flowering shrubs we planted in recent years are all coming good in May and June. So that was very difficult, because as each one successively flowered and then the flowers fell away, that reminded we were getting near the anniversary. And the anniversaries are always very difficult, obviously.
Well, I'm just looking at the clock and we're getting near the end of the programme, and I want to get Ahmed in Cricklewood on the line. But Ahmed, we haven't got that long left, so if you could be relatively concise, I'd be grateful. Ahmed, go ahead.
Hiya.
Hi.
Okay, sorry, my voice is a bit choked up from yesterday shouting for the England game, but I wanted to say that my friend was recently going through something quite recent, actually, and I tried to open up to him. Sorry, I tried to help him to open up to me, but he just wasn't having it from my end. And so another friend of mine would literally be up 24 and on call for this bloke. Literally 5 a.m., 7 a.m., no matter what time it was, because he was so dear to us, we couldn't bear the thought of him actually leaving us, even if it wasn't true of him actually having these suicidal thoughts. But the event just to open up and say I'm having these suicidal thoughts is absolutely nuts, and I would never let anyone go through it. So I wanted to say that it's extremely important for anyone that's going through mental health to talk, to always talk, because there's always going to be someone available for you. If it's not family, it's a friend. If it's not a friend, it's a helpline. If it's not a helpline, it's going to be a random bloke that you meet, or even a customer, for example, if you're at work. I've had these many times where customers open up to me, and I'm in the car sales industry, so I always get these kind of these talks always open up because I'm always having to ask various questions to qualify them for the car they're actually buying. But with that being said, it's extremely, extremely important to open up and do something that you love, whether that's eating a particular food that makes you feel good, or playing a particular sport that actually makes you feel good. But it's always good to think of your life as something beautiful and something that's ongoing, and what's coming is better than what's gone. And that's all I have to say, really.
Well,
Thank you so much.
we could not have picked a better caller to finish on, because he's kind of summed up exactly what you've been saying through the hour, hasn't he?
Yeah, it's marvellous, I mean, that you are actually talking to this guy, and you've spotted that there's a problem, and you are determined to help. I mean, that is wonderful. But I would end, we've touched on them. There are, for those who are in a really bad way and are really worried, there are these brilliant organisations, Samaritans, Mind, Paris, and I went to Liverpool last week. I went to James's Place, which is a brilliant new refuge where I met a young guy from Watford, actually, who had been in a really bad way, and by weekly courses of therapy had really come good. So there is, really end this, no suicide is necessary and no suicide is inevitable, and there is help out there.
Well, I'm so grateful for you to coming into the studio, because I know every time you talk about it, it brings it all back. It must be quite painful to do, and we really appreciate it. And if you want to hear more of Owen, he did this wonderful podcast with Jack Blanchard of Politico. Look that up and listen to it, because he's got some... He talks about a lot of the things that we've talked about in this hour, but also talks about this Mongol derby that he went on with his wife Rose, which you just have to listen to that. It's just amazing. So thank you so much for joining us, Owen.